Today we'll be looking at Project Honolulu, a brief overview. So to get started, first you'll just go ahead and open up your browser. So once you have your browser open, you'll go ahead and type in the URL that you configured for your Project Honolulu server. So in my case, I configured it on HTTPS, so port 443. We'll go ahead and type in a username and password. And that'll bring me into the open homepage of Project Honolulu. So Project Honolulu is currently in technical preview and it's publicly available. So you can download it, try it out, get familiar with it. And today we're just going to be showing you a high-level overview of the various capabilities within the project. So once you log in, that'll bring you to this all connection screen. And on the all connection screen is where you can add in your various servers and failover clusters or HyperConverged clusters that you may have in your environment that you want to manage using Project Honolulu. Also on this main screen is the Project Honolulu logo in the upper left hand corner. Somewhat serves as a home button. So as you navigate to various different areas of the app, you can always click there to get back to the main page. To the right of that, we have the drop down, and the drop down has the three primary solutions that are currently part of Project Honolulu. So we have your server manager, failover cluster manager, and then also the HyperConverged cluster manager. We'll be briefly discussing each one of these during over the next few minutes. So, and in Project Honolulu, what you can do at this main screen is that you can add in additional servers to be managed. And one thing you may notice is I already have various different servers added into this interface, but only one of them shows us online. So remember when we first started, I typed in my credentials. So those credentials were used to only connect to the Project Honolulu server itself within my environment. For any other servers, I would need to provide credentials in order to access those servers. So I'm going to actually just walk through the process of adding a server. So what I want to do here, I'm actually going to remove one of the servers that I actually already have added. So I'm going to remove my Scorch server. So I'm going to click the checkbox next to it and go ahead and hit remove. I get prompted if I really want to remove this or not. I'll say yes. Alright, so that's now taken off my list. Let's drop down 28 items. And I did mention, but you can search for server names. As this list get longer, you can actually type in the server name to search there. So we're going to go ahead and add a server back, or add that same server back. And the experience once you hit add is that you have the three choices that we previously discussed. So you can add server connection. That would be for just a standalone server that you want to add under management. If you have a failover cluster connection, you'll use this section option. And then you also have a hyperconverged cluster, you'll use this third option. So there are some limitations on some of these. So one thing to keep in mind is that currently Project Honolulu only supports Windows Server 2012 and above. So if you have some 2008 or 2 servers, currently those are not supported by Project Honolulu to manage them. But this is something to keep in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind as far as the hyperconverged cluster connection, that only supports currently the semi-annual channel release of Windows Server. So if you have Windows Server 2016 installed, that won't be supported by this particular solution. But it works with all other ones are valid. So for this case, we're just going to add a regular server connection. And remember, we removed the Scorch server, so we're just going to add that same server back. So go ahead and type in the name of that server. So what happens is I'm typing in the name of the server. It goes and try to find that server, see if it's valid. If it is, it goes ahead and try to log into it. And then I have some options for logging in. One is that I can use local administrative password solutions. If I have that configured, I can use that as an option. If I don't, I can just go ahead and manually type in a username and password that I want to use. That can be either a domain account or it can be a local account that's valid on the server. So in my case, I'm just going to use a domain account. And the thing to note, they have an exclamation point here. They're just telling you that, hey, these credentials are stored for this session only. So what that means, as you log in and out of Project Honolulu, these credentials won't be saved for reuse. So you'll have to put them in next time you connect. So go ahead and say submit. And now what should happen, that server should get added to my list. So there we go. Now I see that server popped up there again. And let's go ahead and click on it and provide our credentials again. So again, I'm just gonna do that administrator account again. Put in username and password. And one of the neat things that you can do, say if one of the accounts that you use, if they're valid across a large swath of the servers that you have defined here, I can check this box, and for this session, it'll use those credentials across all of those servers. So in this case, I'm going to check that box and hit continue. And then what that's going to do, that's going to go ahead and try to connect up to that server. All right, so that brings us to the main overview for that server. So right now, you see at the upper left hand corner, I'm connected up to that server there, and then I can see various different information about that server. So I can see obviously the name, I can see the processor that it has, the number of NICs it has, what domain it's a part of, what operating system is running, the model of the server. In this case, this is a virtual machine, how much memory it has, how many logic processors associated with it, disk space, how much disk space is used. And then down here at the bottom, this kind of gives you somewhat of a task manager experience, where I can kind of see the CPU utilization, the uptime of the system. I can see the memory utilization. I can see Ethernet and network throughput. I can see disk throughput, read, write, transfer rates across all of my disks on the server. So you get a lot of rich information that is streaming in real time into the console from that server. So other things you can see here at the top is that you have the capabilities to do things like restart and shut down the server directly here from the console. If I didn't want to see the disk metrics, I have the capability to disable that here. Other things I can do, I can edit the computer ID. So if I want to give this server a new name or join it to a different domain, I can kind of do all those type of tasks directly here in the console without needing to like RDP into the server and perform these tasks. Other things I can do, if I hit on my settings button, I have options to configure and view various environmental variables configured on the system in the context of the user as well as in the context of the system. So I can create new ones or edit existing ones. So if I hit that and edit, I can change that value if I needed to. Or again, I can add new system environment variables to the system. Other things I can do is I can have capability to turn on remote desktop if it's not already enabled on the system, or turn it off if you don't want it on. I can do either one from the console here, or just go to remote desktop, select the options that I want, and hit save, and that'll go out to the system and make the appropriate changes to make that work. So I'll go ahead and hit close there. So yeah, that's a kind of a high level overview of what is there. As you can see here on the left hand side, there's a lot of other capabilities here, but we'll be discussing some of these other capabilities in another video at a later date. So let's go ahead and jump back over to the home page. So if you recall, previously when we initially connected to the Scorch server, I selected that checkbox that said you kind of use these credentials for all the connections. So as you can see here, we're seeing a lot of these are starting to say turn online. So what's happening is automatically going out and trying to verify that it can connect to the server using those credentials that I've provided on Scorch MS. And we're seeing that for the most part it's connected to all of them except for these two OMS gateways. Excuse me. So these OMS gateways, these servers are probably all just offline, so that's why I'm getting a connection error on connecting to both of them. But all the other ones are online. So the experience now that I've have those credentials saved, well, any of these servers that are here, I can just kind of click on it and go and see and grab that same information that I saw from the other server. So again, I'm connected to a DC in this case, and I'm seeing that same information on what's going on from memory, CPU perspective, what OS, what processor, how many processors it has, how much memory, all those various different metrics are available for me to see and utilize there. All right, so we'll go on over to the Failover Cluster Manager solution. So the experience here is very similar to what we just saw with the Server Manager experience. So I already have a few clusters already added. Let's say we're going to add a new cluster. I would just simply say add. And then over here on the right hand side, I would have to type in the cluster name. So it has that same experience as I'm typing in the server name. It's gonna go out and see can it verify or find that cluster. So if it does find a cluster with that name, it will also enumerate the nodes that are part of that cluster and give me an option to also add the individual nodes to server manager at the same time. So in the case of this cluster I already have added into the environment. But if this was a new cluster, this is kind of the experience you would do. And when we're looking at server manager, I didn't mention it, but you do have a capability to import server lists or server name lists from a text file. So you can provide a text file to the interface here with a long list of servers, and then it'll iterate through and add each one of them in, be it a cluster or standalone servers. Go ahead and cancel out of that. So we're going to go ahead and connect into one of these clusters. So I'm going to connect to this ST2D cluster. Then at the top, again, I get a high-level overview of what's going on within that cluster. I can see, okay, this is the main cluster name. The current host of the cluster is S2DMS1. I can see there's 2 clustered roles on top of it. There's 2 networks, and there's 2 disks. I also can see if I have witness disk or a witness node and things like that configured, or file share witness or whatever it may be. I would be able to see those details here. In the case of this cluster, there is none. And then also I can see the various different cluster hosted resources that are associated with the cluster. So any like IP addresses, any additional infrastructure pieces that are hosted on that primary cluster, those components will be visible here. And then for each one of those individual pieces, I have capability of like stop and starting, simulated failure, or removing that piece for those pieces. Then also I can dive in a little bit deeper, looking at things like the disk. So I'll go out and enumerate that. So I can see here I have 2 disks, one named S2D DHCP, and then I have some available storage. I can see that information there. Same for networks. You can see there's 2 different cluster networks associated with these nodes. I'm going to go to Node tab. I can see the individual nodes that makes up the cluster, what their assigned votes are, what the current vote are. And then in my environment, I don't have any of these other metrics like site, rack, and chassis, these properties configured. But if I did, or if you did, those properties would also show up in the console here. So if I click on one of those nodes, I can do various different tasks against them. So I can stop the cluster service on it, start the cluster service, go and manage that node. So if I were to click manage, what that'll do, that'll jump me from the failover cluster manager solution to the server manager solution for this standalone server. So we do have like deep linking in between the various solutions, so you can jump right to a particular area of another solution from one solution. Then also I can do things like pause a node. So if I jump over to roles, on the role side, you can see all the various different roles that are deployed on the cluster. So in the case of this cluster, I only have 2 roles. So I have a DHCP server, and then I also have a scale out file server cluster role deployed on there. And I can see which respective node is hosting that role at the current time. Now, I also can, directly here from the console, I can kind of migrate and move those cluster roles around within the cluster. And as I click on the particular role, I see details about that role down at the bottom. So any pieces that it currently holds, I can kind of see those details. So any associated IP addresses with that, any associated storage, any associated services, I can kind of see all of that information in this view here. And in the case of this DHCP server role, let's say if we wanted to actually migrate that to another node in cluster, I just simply hit move, and then I select the node that I wanted to migrate to, and let's hit move again. And what you see, you kind of see it's kind of a toast notification come up in the top upper right hand corner, and also we'll see a notification indicator up here at the top. So these are kind of synchronous actions. So it'll go and do the work in the background, and then once that completes, I'll get a notification in the console. So I don't, once I actually initiate this, this happens pretty fast for this particular world. But say if there was something that was going to take several seconds or a minute or something like that to occur, I wouldn't have to wait for that to finish before doing something else. I can actually kick off that job and then go in and do other things in the console, and then I would receive a notification up here in the upper right hand corner. Once that completes, or if it failed, or whatever the scenario may be, I'll receive that message back up here in the notification area. All right, so yeah, so that's kind of Failover Cluster Manager. In the case of this cluster, I don't have any virtual machines or virtual switches associated with it. I'll just show you what will happen if I don't have anything for that. We're just gonna get a error message telling me, hey, Hyper-V is not installed on the server. So it goes out, try to check for that role, see if there's any virtual machines, and that there's nothing, so we'll get this message back. But in another future video, we'll dive in a little bit deeper into the virtual machines as well as the virtual switches on a cluster that has virtual machines, so you can see what that looks like as well. All right, so that's Failover Cluster Manager. So let's go ahead and move over to HyperConverged Cluster Manager. So HyperConverged Cluster Manager, actually in my environment right now, I actually don't have a true hyperconverged cluster. So even though these are showing online and it's showing up under the scenario, it's actually not going to work. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like. At a later date, I will build a compatible hyperconverged cluster, and we'll demonstrate that at a later date. So as you can see, once I click on this S2B cluster, it's giving me an error message telling me that, hey, the target cluster must use Windows Server semi-annual channel, at least for now. So all of these other ones, they'll give a similar error since I'm not running the correct version of Windows. So yeah, this is a brief overview of Project Honolulu, and thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.